When the last notes of the violin faded into the crisp air of the town square and the old white-haired man slowly lowered his bow, the entire crowd that moments before had been hostile fell silent, tears streaming down the faces of those who had come to drive him away. 6 months earlier, no one in Harmony Creek knew the name of Sebastian Melody. The small town nestled amongst Rocky Mountains thrived on tourism controlled by the Cavendish family for 3 generations. Luxurious hotels, expensive restaurants, and souvenir shops occupied every inch of the central square, transforming the heart of the town into an artificial and exclusive environment. Longtime residents had been gradually pushed to the outskirts, their traditions forgotten in the name of economic progress. Sebastian arrived one September morning, carrying only a worn leather suitcase and his violin in a wooden case weathered by time. He was 72 years old, with completely white hair and bright blue eyes that shone with a deep serenity. His simple clothes, brown twill trousers, a faded plaid shirt, and a wool vest, contrasted sharply with the artificial luxury that dominated the main square. He didn't ask anyone for permission. He simply sat on the stone bench in front of the old colonial church, took the violin from its case, and began to play. The music that flowed from his hands wasn't just sound, it was living memory. It was the work songs the old residents used to sing in the fields, the lullabies grandmothers whispered to their grandchildren, the festive rhythms that enlivened the simple weddings of yesteryear. The first to stop were the children. Fascinated, they approached slowly as if drawn by an invisible magnet. Sebastian smiled gently, making small variations in the melody to include each new listener who arrived. When a girl with curly hair shyly approached, he began to play a sweet version of Ring Around the Rosie. When a wide-eyed boy appeared with his mother, the music transformed into a cheerful little march that made the boy clap his hands. "You're not allowed to play here," a firm voice said from behind him. Sebastian turned slowly, without stopping playing, and saw a man in a dark suit and red tie. It was Robert Cavendish, Jr., son of the owner of the town's main hotels and president of the local chamber of commerce. "I don't see any sign," Sebastian replied calmly, continuing the melody with one hand while adjusting the position of his violin with the other. "You don't need a sign. This square is a tourist landmark." "You're disrupting the atmosphere for our visitors," retorted Robert, gesturing towards the tourists who, ironically, had stopped their walks to listen to the music. Then something unexpected happened. One of the tourists, a middle-aged man with a foreign accent, approached the group. "Excuse me for interrupting," he said in heavily accented English, "but I must say, this music is the most authentic experience I've had since arriving in Brazil. This is what I came for. Real culture, not artificial settings." Robert was disconcerted. "Sir, you don't understand. We have standards." "Standards," the tourist repeated. "My friend, I run a cultural tourism agency in Europe. I recognize authenticity when I see it, and this gentleman here is a treasure." He turned to Sebastian. "Would you play for my group tomorrow? I'll pay well." Sebastian stopped playing and smiled. "You don't need to pay anything, sir. Music is a gift, not a commodity." The tourist was even more impressed. Robert in turn realized the situation was slipping from his control. "Very well," he said, attempting to regain authority, "but if he's going to stay here, he needs a permit from the city hall, and insurance, and a certificate of good conduct. He can't just show up and—" "I'll take care of that," a woman's voice interrupted. It was Marina Santos, a newly graduated lawyer, who had returned to Harmony Creek after graduating from the capital city. "Mr. Sebastian, if you'll allow me, I can assist you with all the necessary paperwork." Robert was visibly irritated. "Marina, you can't be serious. Would your father agree with this?" Marina was the daughter of a local merchant who depended on tourism, but she had grown up listening to her grandmother's stories about what the town was like before the Cavendish family's modernization. "My father always taught me that culture isn't negotiable, Robert, and Mr. Sebastian represents more genuine culture than all your themed hotels put together." In the following days, a routine was established. Sebastian arrived every morning at 10 o'clock, set up his stool, and played until late afternoon. His audience gradually grew, not only curious tourists, but also locals who had forgotten the simple pleasure of listening to live music. Mrs. Conception began bringing other elderly people. Anthony, who had been a violist in his youth, showed up one day with his dusty instrument. "May I accompany you?" he asked shyly. Sebastian smiled and began an old folk song they both knew. The harmony between violin and guitar created a magical atmosphere that caused several people to stop walking and listen. The children, initially only spectators, began to participate more actively. The girl with curly hair, whose name was Louisa, brought a recorder from school. The boy with big eyes, Peter, discovered he could whistle melodically. Others brought improvised rattles, small tambourines, even wooden spoons that they transformed into percussion instruments. And so, without anyone planning it, a small popular orchestra formed in the heart of the square. Sebastian, with his experience as a conductor, coordinated everything with subtle gestures, including each new musician who appeared, adjusting the repertoire so that everyone could participate. Robert Cavendish watched from afar, increasingly worried. Not that the tourists were complaining, on the contrary, many praised the authentic cultural experience. But something about Sebastian's growing popularity deeply bothered. It was as if the old maestro represented everything he and his family had worked to erase from the town: simplicity, spontaneity, genuine human connection. The last straw came when Robert discovered that some tourists were choosing simpler guest houses on the outskirts instead of the family's luxury hotels, preferring to stay near the old man who plays the violin in the square. "I'm losing customers because of a musical beggar," he complained to his father. Robert Cavendish Sr., the family patriarch, a 75-year-old man who had built the local tourism empire, listened to his son's account with growing interest. "You said he's a conductor?" he asked. "He was, retired. Now he plays popular music for children and old people." Robert Sr. became thoughtful. There was something familiar about that name, Sebastian Melody. Suddenly, his memory clicked. "My God," he murmured. "Sebastian Melody, I know that name." The next day, the elder Cavendish appeared in the square. Sebastian was in the middle of an impromptu performance with his group of amateur musicians when he noticed the elegant man watching from afar. Their eyes met, and Robert Sr. approached slowly. "Maestro Sebastian Melody," he said, removing his hat as a sign of respect. "Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra, 40 years of career. 3 national awards for classical music." Sebastian stopped playing, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I was at your last concert as principal conductor. My wife and I were season ticket holder. Your interpretation of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was unforgettable." A respectful silence fell between the two men. The amateur musicians stopped playing, sensing the solemnity of the moment. "You are Robert Cavendish," Sebastian said. "It wasn't a question. I am, and I must admit I didn't expect to find a conductor of your reputation playing popular music in a small town square." Sebastian smiled softly. "Music has no address, Mr. Cavendish. It lives where it finds hearts willing to receive it." Robert Sr. looked around, observing the attentive faces of the children, the quiet joy of the elderly, the expectation of the adults who had stopped their activities to listen. "My son thinks you're hurting our business, and do you think so too?" The old businessman took a moment to answer. "I think my son forgot why we started investing in tourism in Harmony Creek. It wasn't just about the money, it was because we believed that our town had something special to offer the world." "And it does," Sebastian said simply. "It does, but at some point we lost sight of that. We transformed specialty into artificiality." It was impossible not to notice the emotion in the older man's voice. Robert Sr. continued. "Maestro, may I make a proposal? How about we organize an official concert? An event that unites your music with the history of our town." Sebastian gently shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Cavendish, but that's not what these people need. They need everyday music, not special events. They need to rediscover that music isn't entertainment, it's a part of life." Just then, Robert Jr. appeared, visibly irritated at seeing his father chatting cordially with the man he considered a problem. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Getting to know our visitor better," Robert Sr. replied calmly. "Visitor, Dad, this man has been here for weeks, disrupting the atmosphere of the square, gathering vagrants and—" "Watch your words, son." The tension in the air was palpable. Mrs. Conception, observing the scene from her chair, slowly rose. "Vagrants," she said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Young man, these vagrants are the people who built this town before you arrived with your cold marble hotels. Mrs. Conception, you don't understand modern economics." "I understand people, young Robert, and this man here," she pointed to Sebastian, "brought more life to this square in a few weeks than you have in decades." Other residents began to approach, forming a circle that gradually took on the air of a silent confrontation. Louisa came running. Someone had called her to alert her about the argument in the square. "What's going on here?" she asked, breathless. "Your client is being asked to permanently leave the square," Robert Jr. said, trying to adopt an official tone, "for disturbing the public order." "What public order?" Louisa looked around. "I only see people gathered peacefully to listen to music. I see people obstructing the free movement of tourists and harming the city's commercial image." Then the European tourist reappeared, this time accompanied by a group of about 20 people. "Maestro," he called cheerfully, "I brought my friends to hear your wonderful music." Robert Jr. was visibly disconcerted. "My friends, I regret to inform you that there will be no performance today." "Why?" asked a woman from the group, in English. "Administrative issues." The tourist who knew Sebastian quickly translated for the group. The reactions were immediate, expressions of disappointment, negative comments about bureaucracy killing culture, threats to leave the town sooner than planned. Robert Sr. watched everything with growing discomfort. His son, in an attempt to protect the family business, was creating exactly the kind of situation that could harm them. "Son," he said softly, "I think we should reconsider this position." "Dad, we can't give in to pressure." "It's not pressure, it's common sense." Sebastian, who had remained silent throughout the argument, raised his soft but firm voice. "May I suggest something?" Everyone turned to him. "How about we let the people decide? If someone is bothered by the music, they can ask me to stop. If someone wants me to continue, they can ask me to continue. Music is dialogue, not a monologue." "Great idea," Louisa said immediately. "Let's have an informal public consultation, right here and now." Robert Jr. tried to protest, but his father silenced him with a gesture. "I agree with the maestro's proposal." And so right there in the square, under the golden light of the late afternoon, a kind of impromptu assembly was established. Sebastian remained seated on his bench, violin in his lap, while people clearly took their positions: on one side, those who supported his presence, on the other those who opposed it. The result was overwhelming. Longtime residents, children, several tourists, small shopkeepers, hotel employees, all sided with Sebastian. On the opposite side, only Robert Jr. and 2 or 3 merchants, who directly depended on contracts with the Cavendish hotels. "Well," said Robert Sr., observing the clear popular manifestation, "I think the people have spoken." But Robert Jr. was not giving up. "This isn't democracy, it's populism. You don't understand the long-term economic implications." Then came the most touching moment of that afternoon. Young Louisa, with curly hair, left the group supporting Sebastian, and walked to Robert Jr. She looked at him with her large, serious eyes. "Mr. Robert," she said in a clear voice, "why don't you like music?" The question, asked with the brutal sincerity of children, hit Robert Jr. like a punch in the stomach. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. "It's not that I don't like music," he finally managed to murmur. "Then why do you want Mr. Sebastian to leave?" Robert Jr. looked around, seeing all the faces turned towards him, waiting for an answer. For the first time in a long time, He was forced to examine his own motivations honestly. Because, he began, then stopped. Because I'm afraid. The silence that followed was charged with surprise. No one expected this confession. Afraid of what? Sebastian asked gently. Afraid that you're right, said Robert Jr., his voice almost inaudible. Afraid that we've lost something important along the way. Afraid that our town has become empty. The confession deeply touched everyone present. Robert Sr. approached his son and put his hand on his shoulder. It's not lost, son. Nothing is lost while there are still people willing to start over. Sebastian slowly rose, put his violin on his shoulder, and began to play a soft, contemplative melody. It was neither sad nor joyful. It was reflective, like a musical conversation with the soul. Gradually, everyone present fell silent, letting the music fill the space in their hearts. When he finished, Sebastian looked directly at Robert Jr. Music doesn't destroy, young man. Music reveals. If something in our town was hidden, the music only brought it to light. The weeks that followed marked a gradual but profound transformation in Harmony Creek. Robert Jr., initially reluctant, began to discreetly participate in Sebastian's musical sessions, first just observing, then asking questions, finally revealing that he had played the piano in his childhood, before focusing on more practical things. The Cavalcanti family hotels didn't lose customers, they gained a unique selling point. Tourists started choosing Harmony Creek specifically for the authentic musical experience it offered. Robert Cavendish Sr. had the idea of creating a participatory cultural tourism program, where visitors could join the town square's musical sessions as part of their stay. Marina organized free music workshops for children from the outskirts, with Sebastian Melody as a volunteer teacher. Mrs. Conception started a project to rescue the town's oral history, recording testimonies from elderly residents, while Sebastian provided live musical accompaniment. The small group of amateur musicians grew and organized themselves, not as a formal band, but as a musical family that gathered daily to share melodies and stories. Anthony brought in other forgotten guitar players, accordion players, harmonica players, even a woman who played the zither and had spent decades without an instrument, appeared. But it wasn't just the positive aspects that emerged. Over time, the town's real tensions also surfaced: deep economic differences, veiled prejudices, old disputes between families. Sebastian didn't ignore these problems. He incorporated them into the music. He created compositions that allowed for the expression of frustrations, melodies that embraced sadness, rhythms that channeled anger constructively. Music isn't just joy, he explained one afternoon to a group of children. Music is truth, and truth includes everything: joy, sadness, anger, fear, hope. The important thing is that all of this transforms into harmony. There were difficult moments, heated discussions during the musical sessions when sensitive topics came up. Sebastian learned to use his experience as a conductor to mediate conflicts, creating musical pauses when tempers flared, proposing impossible duets between people in disagreement, always reminding them that in music there are no adversaries, only different voices seeking harmony. Then came the day no one expected. Robert Cavendish Jr. showed up in the square carrying a portable digital piano. "Can I join in?" he asked shyly. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Sebastian smiled broadly and made an inviting gesture. "Of course. What music would you like to play?" "I don't know. It's been so long." "Start with something your heart knows," Sebastian suggested. Robert Jr. placed his fingers on the keys and hesitantly began to play a simple melody. It was "Fish Alive," a popular song he had learned from his grandmother in childhood. The music came out shaky, insecure, but charged with genuine emotion. Sebastian gently joined in with the violin, then Anthony with the guitar, then the children with their improvised instruments. In a few minutes, the entire square vibrated with the collective harmony led by the unlikely combination of the humble conductor and the repentant businessman. When the music ended, Robert Jr. had tears in his eyes. "I had forgotten," he murmured. "I had forgotten how good it is to be part of something bigger than ourselves." If you're following this story and are moved by the transformation that music brought to Harmony Creek, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving touching stories like this that show how small gestures can transform entire communities. From that day on, the town square's musical sessions gained an even more special dimension. Robert Jr. not only participated as a musician, but began to use his influence to facilitate musical projects throughout the town. He convinced his father to fund instruments for needy children, organized a small amphitheater in the square, and created an exchange program where musicians from other towns were invited to play with the local group. But the real transformation was internal. Robert Jr. discovered that he had spent years trying to control something that only flourished when released. Harmony Creek didn't need to be an artificial museum town. It could be a living city where tradition and modernity danced together to the sound of genuine music. And Sebastian, he continued to arrive every day at 10 in the morning, setting up his stool, taking his violin out of its case. But now he was no longer alone. He was surrounded by a musical family that had been born from the courage of a simple man who believed in the transformative power of music. Winter arrived, and with it the concern about how to maintain the outdoor musical sessions. That's when Robert Cavendish Sr. made a surprising proposal to open the main lobby of the family's most luxurious hotel for the performances during the cold months. But Dad, Robert Jr., hesitated. "What about the exclusivity of the atmosphere?" "Son," the old businessman replied, "I've learned that real exclusivity doesn't come from who you exclude, but from who you include." And so, during the winter months, the marble lobby of the Cavalcanti Hotel transformed into a democratic stage where children in flip-flops shared space with tourists in expensive shoes, where classical violinists harmonized with folk accordion players, where economic wealth respectfully coexisted with cultural richness. Sebastian adapted his repertoire to the new environment, creating arrangements that took advantage of the lobby's special acoustics. His compositions became more sophisticated without losing their emotional simplicity, incorporating elements that allowed both the participation of children and the appreciation of more demanding adults. The success was so great that Robert Jr. began to receive invitations from other towns interested in replicating the Harmony Creek model. But whenever someone asked about the project's secret, he pointed to Sebastian. "The secret isn't a method, it's a person. It's having someone who genuinely believes in the transformative power of music." Spring arrived, and with it Sebastian's decision that everyone feared but deep down expected. On a golden September afternoon, exactly 1 year after his arrival, he gathered the entire musical group in the square. "It's time for me to continue my journey," he announced softly. The silence that followed was filled with anticipated sadness, but also with deep gratitude. "But we can't continue without you," said Louisa, now a year older but still with the same curly hair. "Of course you can," Sebastian smiled. "You don't need me anymore. You have each other, and you have the music." Robert Jr. stood up, moved. "Maestro, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for our town. For me, I didn't do anything you couldn't have done yourselves. I simply showed that the music was already here, waiting to be unleashed." Marina, ever practical, asked, "When do you plan to leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Sebastian replied. "But today we have one last musical session together." And so, that golden afternoon, the entire town of Harmony Creek gathered in the town square for Sebastian Melody's farewell. Old and new residents, tourists and shopkeepers, children and the elderly, all formed a large circle around the man who had transformed their lives through music, Sebastian began playing alone, a melancholic yet hopeful melody that spoke of farewells and new beginnings. Gradually, all the other musicians joined in, Robert Jr. on the piano, Anthony on the guitar, the children with their small instruments, the adults with their voices. The music grew, expanded, embraced the entire square, and echoed through the town streets. It was no longer just a performance, it was a collective celebration of all they had achieved together. When the last notes dissipated into the air, the ensuing silence was unlike any other. It was a full silence, laden with gratitude and transformation. Sebastian looked around, seeing the faces that had become so familiar, the people who had become his musical family. "Always remember," he said, in a soft voice that reached everyone present, "music isn't performance, it's connection. It's not entertainment, it's shared life." Robert Jr. approached, carrying a carefully prepared package. "Maestro, we wanted to give you something as a souvenir from Harmony Creek." Sebastian opened the package and found a small handwritten musical score. It was a collective composition. Each member of the musical group had contributed some notes, creating a unique melody that represented the harmony achieved by the town. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his eyes welling up. "It's the most beautiful music I've ever seen." Mrs. Conception approached with difficulty, leaning on her cane. "Sebastian," she said, "you gave us back our soul. How can we thank you for that?" "By continuing to play," he replied simply, "by continuing to believe that music heals, unites, transforms, by continuing to be a community that knows how to harmonize differences." Early the next morning, Sebastian packed his worn leather suitcase and put his violin in its weathered wooden case. But this time, he wasn't alone in his departure. The entire musical group accompanied him to the small bus station on the outskirts of town. Robert Jr., who had offered to drive him to the capital, asked one last time, "Are you sure you don't want to stay a little longer?" Sebastian smiled, that serene smile that everyone had learned to recognize and love. "I'm sure you don't need me anymore, and there are other towns waiting for music." The bus arrived, old and noisy, contrasting with the luxurious cars that used to circulate through the town. Sebastian slowly boarded, stowed his luggage, and settled into a seat by the window. As the vehicle began to move, he waved from the window, and then, spontaneously, the whole group began to play. Right there, at the bus station, without planning, without a stage, without an audience, just for love. Robert Jr. played a little melody on his phone. The children sang. Anthony strummed his guitar. Marina clapped, keeping the rhythm. The music accompanied them until the bus disappeared around the bend in the road, and it continued echoing for a long time afterward, because it had become a permanent part of their lives. 2 years later, Harmony Creek was nationally recognized as a model of sustainable cultural tourism. The musical project, initiated by Sebastian, had expanded, including regular workshops, seasonal festivals, and an artist residency program that attracted musicians from across the country. Robert Jr. had become a different kind of businessman, who measured success not only in profits but in smiles. His father, Robert Sr., before passing away peacefully, had the joy of seeing the town he had helped build find its true identity. Marina opened a law firm specializing in cultural rights, defending musical projects in small towns across the country. Mrs. Conception, even in old age, continued to participate in the musical sessions, now accompanied by grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The children grew up, but they didn't abandon music. Louisa learned to play the violin properly and dreamed of becoming a conductor. Peter discovered a talent for composition and wrote songs that told stories of the town. And Sebastian, nobody knew exactly where he was, but occasionally news arrived, a letter from an inland town,
reporting the arrival of a wandering maestro who played in the main square. A photo sent by tourist showing a white-haired man playing the violin at a craft fair. Stories of musical transformations in distant places, always with the same standard: simplicity, authenticity, human connection. Robert Jr. kept all this news in a special folder. Sometimes, during the musical sessions in the square, he would read some to the group, and everyone would smile, knowing that their maestro continued to plant seeds of harmony around the world. On the main wall of the Cavendish Hotel, where there was once an expensive and meaningless abstract painting, the handwritten score that Sebastian had left as a gift was now framed, not the one they had given him, but an original composition he had created, especially for Harmony Creek. It was called Song of the Reborn Square, and in the marginal notes, in his own hand, he had written, "For a town that learned that music is not noise, it is the sound of the heart beating in harmony." Every visitor who arrived at the hotel heard this story, and many, inspired, went down to the square to participate in the musical sessions that took place every afternoon, continuing the legacy of a simple man who proved that music is, in fact, the universal language of hope. The last time anyone had direct news from Sebastian was 6 months after his departure. A handwritten little note arrived, addressed to the Harmony Creek musical family. It simply said, "My dearest friends, I hear your echo in the wind. The music we planted together continues to grow, not only in Harmony Creek, but in my heart and in the hearts of all the people you touch with your harmony. Keep playing, keep believing, keep being living proof that a better world is possible when people choose to sing together instead of shouting alone. With love and eternal gratitude, Sebastian." And so ends the story of the wandering maestro who arrived in a town hardened by artificial progress and left behind a community transformed by the power of genuine music. Sebastian Melody proved that grand gestures aren't necessary to change the world. Sometimes, all it takes is to sit in a town square, take a violin out of its case, and believe that music is the strongest bridge between human hearts. In Harmony Creek, even today, at 10 o'clock in the morning, someone sits on the stone bench in front of the colonial church. Sometimes it's Robert Jr., sometimes it's Marina, sometimes it's one of the children who grew up in the project, sometimes it's a visitor inspired by the story, and always, without fail, they take out an instrument, a violin, a guitar, a flute, or simply their voice, and begin to play. Because they learned that music isn't a special event that happens once in a while. Music is the soundtrack of everyday life. It's the rhythm that connects us to one another. It's the melody that transforms differences into harmony. And when someone asks why they continue, why they keep alive the tradition started by a man who left so long ago, the answer is always the same, spoken with the serene smile they learned from Sebastian. Because music always returns, and when it returns, it brings with it all that is best in humanity.